Welcome back to the Convo Couch, everyone. I am Pasta Jardula, and Johnny Sue is still spinning on those ones and twos. Today we have two special guests in the studio. We have from South Florida, from the MCSC Network. He is also an election integrity activist, Niko House. And in Pennsylvania, we have from the Real Progressive, he is an MMT expert and a Bernie Sanders supporter. We have Steve Grumbine. How you doing, gentlemen? It's good to see you today. Steve, let's start with you. You've been vocal about Gabbard dropping out and endorsing Sanders. How exactly is that going to help Bernie Sanders? Go ahead.
So you look at it like this. We already know that the Democratic Party has no love for progressives whatsoever. And the only way that we're ever going to win is by winning with overwhelming numbers. They have rigged everything under the sun. I don't care what other people say. I know for a fact that if we can't swamp those elections with mass turnout and massive Bernie support, none of us are going to win. Bernie's the only one with a genuine movement behind him right now. And so in my mind, I am a Bernie supporter, full truth. But the fact is I think we all support the platform. So right now is the time to eliminate all possibility of the Buttigiegs and the Bloombergs, et cetera, and just wipe them off the map. And to me, this is the only way we can do that. Swamp them with overwhelming numbers. Tulsi was a part of Sanders Institute. Tulsi knows Bernie. I think it's time that we put the full faith and credit of our movement behind the guy who started it, and that's Bernie.
Niko, I've been to a lot of Tulsi events, okay, in multiple states. There's a lot of libertarians, independents that simply will not vote for Bernie Sanders, especially those libertarians. So if Tulsi is the only candidate that will really give her delegates to Bernie at the end, doesn't it just make sense for her to stay in this thing as long as possible to collect those votes that Sanders will never get and then eventually give it to him? Go ahead, Niko.
Well, yeah, 100% agree. And I mean, if Steve was telling me this before Tulsi had run in the beginning of January and Bernie had announced, and, you know, maybe if she would have backed him after his initial announcement, we might be having a different conversation. But the truth of the matter is Tulsi's endorsement without a delegate attached to it is almost meaningless. We can't ignore the fact that she's been slandered and maligned and, you know, just lied on oftentimes by Bernie Sanders' own surrogates. We can't ignore the fact that, like you said, Steve, election rigging and election fraud is rampant. And we can't ignore the fact that we had overwhelming numbers before with only one other person in the race. And it didn't matter because of how rampant election fraud is. We're just learning that, you know, exit polling was way off in areas where the AccuVote machine in New Hampshire was used in favor of Buttigieg. We know that Buttigieg and the DNC helped to rig Iowa. We have California coming up. We have Florida coming up. California has 415 pledged delegates. Florida has about 200 plus pledged delegates. New York has about 300 pledged delegates. Unfortunately, Bernie is probably going to lose Florida even if there wasn't rigging. California is looking like it is going to be rigged largely in favor of Pete Buttigieg, and then Warren will get enough delegates and Bloomberg will get enough delegates that it will be a problem for Bernie. And then you have, of course, New York, which will be in April, where we already know how that game goes when it comes to the Democratic primary, how the Democratic Party plays there. So when you couple all the rigging, at this point, it's almost nonsensical to believe that Bernie can win this by himself. The Democratic establishment has known from the very beginning that Bernie Sanders needs 1,991 delegates to win. They just need to win by making sure he doesn't get 1,991 delegates. However, there are plenty of people, in my experience as a Tulsi supporter, that will not vote for Bernie for whatever reason. And that's just a fact. Now, if Tulsi began to do well and Tulsi gained delegates, then, hey, maybe if Tulsi said, this is why I'm doing so, the delegates would be okay with going to Bernie Sanders in the first round before that second round starts and the superdelegates can pick. However, right now, we've seen so many people dedicated to more so to telling Tulsi to drop out than seeing the play on the field, not only for this election in 2020, but setting up Tulsi's message, you know, saying like, look, even if she doesn't get a single delegate, which would be unfortunate for Bernie, but even if she doesn't, we got to make sure that this message continues because Bernie has one more election and that is it. And if he gets cheated out of this one, well, maybe we should be backing and supporting a candidate. Even if you voted for Bernie, you can still back and support a candidate's message. The only one who has been calling out open election fraud and election rigging, rather than pretending like she didn't get silenced, pretending like she hasn't been cheated, pretending like she hasn't been maligned, just because ignoring those facts suits the goal of getting Bernie Sanders elected, at least in the minds of those who have ignored those facts.
Yeah. Steve, we've seen some of the horrific smears on Bernie Sanders in 2016, and we're seeing them today. However, they're a lot less simply because Tulsi Gabbard is in the race. She actually takes the brunt and a lot of those smears away from Bernie. And if that is the case, why on earth would I want Bernie Sanders as a Bernie Sanders supporter, would I want Tulsi to drop out? Go ahead, Steve.
So my take on it is this: Bernie Sanders has to be the one that looks like he is on top. Ultimately, if we allow Bernie Sanders to look like another has-been, just another runner, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying, even if you look at Reuters put out there after New Hampshire, Buttigieg comes in second and Klobuchar comes in with a solid third. They didn't even say anything about who won. Bernie Sanders won. So this is an ongoing thing. They are slamming him for being a socialist. They're slamming him for having pie in the sky views, and the Green New Deal is just pie in the sky, and everything's pie in the sky. And so what they are doing, which is a long play, mind you, it's not just against Sanders. It's not just against Gabbard. It's not just against progressives. It's against the entire thing that goes against the establishment. And what they're doing is they're basically saying, we can't have nice things. We can't do nice things. It's all hopeless. Please be practical. Come over here and vote for this racist pig in Bloomberg or this other son of a bitch, Buttigieg. And my thoughts are that until Bernie is able to hold the mantle, is that you see people out there that would most likely vote for Sanders that are still hanging on for whatever reason to Elizabeth Warren. God knows why the hell they're looking at Elizabeth Warren, but they are. And then you've got the people over here. And I get why you would support Tulsi Gabbard. I understand the entire angle for that. My thoughts are, again, that without the overwhelming numbers, I hear you on the delegates. I don't think that's going to play into this. I think, quite frankly, at the end of the day, Tulsi just doesn't have enough support coming out of these primaries. And that's no slight on her. She's being stymied at every turn. And quite frankly, she is absolutely being blacklisted by the DNC, as they do anybody that doesn't support the establishment. So the chances of her, unless something radical happens, right, the chances of her being able to get enough delegates to make the play that Niko laid out matter, I think is slim to none. And that's no slight on her. I like her immensely. And I like her immensely as an attack dog for Sanders. Let her be a surrogate once again, as she once was, and let her be that bold voice. Because in the end, at the end of the day, it really does come down to a matter of who's got a movement. Think about what they're saying already. They're saying the president can't write laws. The president has to get laws from Congress. He doesn't have a Congress, so nothing's going to happen. Well, that's wrong. Sanders is going to use executive orders. He's going to be using his movement, the mobilizations that he has. And let's be fair, there's nobody can mobilize like Bernie. And this is an opportunity right here, in my opinion only, to really, really show power in the movement and show that it is a big tent. It's a very, very intersectional movement. There is tons of people from all walks of life. We're talking about the whole community, everything, gender spectrum, age spectrum, race spectrum. He has got a true movement behind him. And I say this as somebody who, yes, definitely is supporting this, but I'm saying if she doesn't have delegates to offer, her best play here is to help Sanders win those libertarian voters who right now maybe say they wouldn't do it, but when presented with a Bloomberg, they certainly sure as hell will. That's my take on it.
Niko, let me pick on that, because what Steve said is kind of important. I mean, the Democrats here have really pissed off Trump's base with this impeachment process. And a symbolic vote in New Hampshire, where we just came from, he had almost 140,000 votes. Some of those libertarian and independent votes didn't go the way of Tulsi Gabbard because of that. Doesn't this really hurt Gabbard's chance to be significant in this race and pick up those delegates to pick up for Bernie Sanders with this happening? Go ahead, Niko.
So I just want to say I agree with Steve that there's nobody who is who can really claim to have a movement the size of Bernie Sanders. I also agree with him that, obviously Tulsi has been stymied and been maligned, and so is Bernie. Unfortunately, the reality of the situation is if Tulsi doesn't get enough momentum to get a delegate, then she isn't really of much use to Bernie. And I mean this, not for his purposes. For the movement, she still could be useful, but for Bernie specifically and what he needs to achieve, then it's I mean, like I said, she doesn't really have much use for, or he doesn't have much use for her. And here's the reason why. We all just sat here and acknowledged election rigging and election integrity issues. Even if she brought the 3%, of support that she was allowed to have, and I say allowed because literally they silenced her at every turn, it doesn't really matter because we're still trying to figure out, and we're still trying to do the research to figure out in New Hampshire, okay, did she really even get 10,000 votes? Because there is evidence that is piling up that is making it look like there were votes stolen from her and given to somewhere else in areas where fraudulent voting machines were used. If we continue to pretend like this idea of an overwhelming majority can win this election, then that's why Tulsi should drop out, because her 3% or her 2% would give them, Bernie an overwhelming majority. Then we really, I feel like we're just not living in reality. We need to be celebrating these items. What we should be doing, honestly, even if you're a Bernie supporter, you should be celebrating Tulsi at the top of your lungs. Like, look, man, maybe you don't like Bernie, but this is the person you should be picking if you don't like her. People will vibe with that, because there are Yang supporters, for example, who are on the fence right now. And a lot of them are going to Tulsi mostly because it's the UBI thing, but it's also because a lot of Bernie supporters have been telling Yang to drop out. And that was before the elections even started. Why aren't you, you're just here to take votes away from Bernie. You're just a grifter trying to take votes away from Bernie. And we can't win anything, first of all, when we enter into a movement with that type of attitude. And it's going to be very difficult for anyone to convince anybody to go to Bernie when that we've kind of seen that type of behavior perpetuated by not all Bernie supporters, but but we can't pretend like it isn't some prominent ones, right? So if we can't ignore the reality of election integrity, but what we can do and what would be the smart thing, because we got to assume election integrity issues are a problem. And I think that everybody would agree with that. We got to assume they're going to take votes away. We're going to assume they're going to drop registrations or switch registrations. We got to assume they're going to literally throw boxes of paper ballots away. That is an assumption. We have no reason to assume otherwise. So at that very moment, there are areas where the Democrats don't have control over, where Tulsi would be a potential vote, but Bernie, for whatever reason, will not. And what you have to do, if you're a Bernie supporter, is like, man, look, you might not like Bernie, but hey, if you're a conservative or if you're a right-leaning independent, this is the girl you got to vote for, because look at her election integrity issues. Look at how she signed up to DNC. And at this point, because I feel like it's too late to do a lot of the things that we would have liked to seen done as far as maybe a coalition, but we got to try to get Tulsi back in the position where she can start taking out some of these candidates, because she can do that regardless if she's on Bernie Sanders' campaign or not. But she has more liberty when she's by herself to take out people than with being with Bernie's campaign. You have to, kind of talk around the edges, so to speak. So that's what I think we should be doing. We should be working our damnedest to ensure that Bernie does have an ally instead of putting him on an island, because they've already realized it. The establishment, like I said, they're going to keep working together because they realize that working together by running their own races and then coalescing at the end is how they'll beat Bernie. And yet the progressive movement, it seems to me, it just took way too long to figure that out.
And don't get me wrong, the reason why I wanted to have you gentlemen on the show is because, Steve, you have your opinions, but you don't browbeat and vote shame people into doing things. There are a lot of Bernie Sanders fans, not all of them, but there are a lot out there that don't see Tulsi as an ally. And really, Steve, isn't it up to Bernie Sanders to secure Tulsi Gabbard's support right now? I mean, if she drops out right now, how can we be assured that she'll be a surrogate for Sanders the way she was in 2016? Because it doesn't seem like Bernie Sanders' campaign staff likes Tulsi Gabbard. Go ahead, Steve.
Outside of Nina and Bree. So we got.
Well, I'm talking about the actual campaign staff with Fayez, Matt Duss, some of these people who come from Center for American Progress. They simply just do not like Tulsi Gabbard. Steve, go ahead.
Just think about it like this, right? Bernie Sanders wants to win. They all know that at the end of the day, the person that pulls the lever and says Bernie, that's what they're gunning for. Because Bernie's looking for a massive movement to make these things happen. So ultimately, I don't really care about those surrogates. I think that they're just more people saying things, flapping gums, doing whatever. At the end of the day, we got to do what we do because we believe in what we're doing, and we've got to stick by it, and we've got to go for it, and we've got to keep the goal in mind. My opinion, you do whatever you want. People do whatever they want. Tulsi does whatever she wants. I'm just merely saying I believe at the end of the day that a united progressive front is the only way that we defeat the establishment.
Niko, take a look at this quick tweet. Can you get that one tweet up? And it says this. It's from Ilhan Omar is an American hero. And it says, since nobody else is willing to say it, I will. Bernie's VP only serves one goal, to prevent him from being JFK'd. This is why I favor Tulsi Gabbard, the only candidate they hate more than the only candidate they hate more. Elizabeth Warren for VP means Bernie is dead in the water. Isn't this what it's all about? I mean, I see a lot of burners who hate on Tulsi, and once again, not all of them, but why do these people fail to see Tulsi as an ally? And isn't it important that she is involved in his campaign one way or the other? Go ahead, Niko.
So this is completely anecdotal, by the way, but in my experiences, those who are habitual and chronic bullshitters are very fearful of those who have had a propensity to see through bullshit. Clearly, Tulsi is one of those people who has been able to see through bullshit, as she has dealt with a lot of bullshit her entire life that she's had to evolve from. When people can't grift off your campaign, when they can't grift off of your movement because you are known to call people out, because if they came in and tried to pull some nonsense like what you see people they've been hanging on to both Warren and Bernie, where they endorse Bernie, but they still promote Elizabeth Warren because they're hoping after this movement, they're like, look, Elizabeth Warren is the type of person that will take your support regardless of whether or not it's genuine, regardless of whether or not there's a potential for you to switch sides the moment it's inconvenient for you to support her. She don't care about that. Just like most of the neoliberal establishment does it. So they know that Tulsi isn't really here for a grift. She's here to fight. She's going to ask you to do the tough work. And let's be honest, and I'm sure Steve, as a person who's been on the ground, probably agrees with this sentiment. Most of the people don't want to do the tough work. They don't want to do what Tim Canova does. They don't want to do what Niko House does or Pasta and Fiorella do by getting on the ground and interviewing election integrity activists and fighting for election integrity issues and going to these events and fighting for these causes, introducing ballot initiatives. The work that a Tulsi Gabbard would ask you to do that would honestly require you to do this against all odds. They would rather push somebody. And by the way, all these things that make Tulsi great, they also perceive, unfortunately, as potential issues that could expose weak spots in Bernie, which, like every candidate, he has some, and Tulsi does honestly address a lot of those weak spots. So they think it weakens Bernie instead of saying, wow, you know what? A lot of those issues that Bernie is weak on, Tulsi is great on. So wouldn't that make this the strongest ticket in history? That's what they should be thinking. But instead, it's like they're singularly focused not only, once again, on this election, but they're also worried about what happens next. And Tulsi has made it clear that she is not really here for the bullshit. And I think that has a lot to do with why people kind of malign her, because it's not just about this election, but the next one as well. And they want to be part of the winning team.
Steve, give us your last 60 seconds on your pitch why Tulsi Gabbard should drop out and endorse Bernie Sanders right now and unite the progressive base. Go ahead, Steve.
Because it's all about goals, right? It's all about goals. I hear everything you're saying. We can do all the election integrity with or without Tulsi at the top of the ticket. I'm really, really supportive of Tulsi in general, but I have to say that we all know, Bernie is the only one with the movement. So at this point in time, I want to see all people out there running the streets, doing these things for Bernie, not just for Bernie, because it's really never been about Bernie. It's about us. So right now, while we have a movement, I say we haven't had one of these things in my 51 years, except for in 2015. Let's go ahead. Let's make it happen. And that's my take. It's no slight on anyone.
Strong take.
It's just a matter of direction. Let's get it done.
Strong take. Niko House, give us your last 60 seconds why Tulsi should stay in and keep fighting. Go ahead.
Well, her message is bigger than the presidency. It's not about, like I said, it's not about me. It's about us. And there has to be a movement after Bernie Sanders. And if Tulsi is allowed to be silenced in a way that she has been without anybody speaking up for her, then it can happen to anybody after Bernie, right? I'm not really sure how many reliable people we have to carry on this movement after Bernie Sanders. And that's unfortunate, but it's the world we live in right now. Now, I will say this, though. If Tulsi said, hey, I made this particular deal with Bernie, doesn't have to be publicized, but we're going to work to get him elected. Then she would be in a position to maybe call, if she is free to call election integrity, for example, or election integrity issues, if she is free to call out the military industrial complex freely, rather than being handcuffed by the campaign for any number of reasons, things like that, then, I would lean more towards Steve and say, you know what? Okay, let's get it. Let's do what we got to do and handle business. But until we can get that guarantee, until we can get a vice presidential pick guaranteed, until we can come up with a plan to address election integrity, then it's very, very important that the only person who's addressing election integrity, asking for diplomacy without demonizing and alienating world leaders, the only person who is calling it straight and really fighting and fending for herself against all odds, that's the person that should remain in the race regardless of what the outcome should be. And that's just how I feel about it. And I'll say that it's crazy to me because one of the things that pissed off so many Bernie Sanders supporters was he quit, right? And yeah, we know the superdelegates were a problem, but even with the superdelegates, he still went to the convention and he still fought until that point. And because Tulsi is going against all odds, very similar to Bernie Sanders, but what he dealt with in 2016 with the superdelegates, people were saying, hey, you know what would be best for the movement? If you set the example going forward by quitting when it got the hardest, instead of doubling down and fighting until you just can't fight no more, or until Bernie makes that, he reaches out his hand and says, hey, come fight with me. Let's do this together. We should not allow anybody, Tulsi or Bernie for that matter, to set the example for the progressive movement by quitting just because the establishment worked very hard to get us to quit. Because at that point, the establishment wins.
Yeah, very riveting conversation, gentlemen. I got a couple super chats to read off real quick, but I want to thank you. This is an open discussion. We got to keep talking about this. I personally don't hold it against Bernie Sanders at the very end for falling on his sword. I thought of, that's how I perceived it. I thought he wanted to still maintain some of his power to come back and fight another day. So I really don't hold it against him that much. However, I know a lot of people were disappointed and they love Tulsi's fight and scrap and the way she's going. Steve Grumbine, Niko House, thank you so much for joining us. Keep coming on the show.
I have a
Keep
question.
talking about this.
I have a question.
Johnny has one question. Go ahead.
This is Jonny Tsunami. I got a question. This is directed towards Steve, and then Niko, we can hear your thoughts after. Should we also? Are you also calling for Elizabeth Warren to drop out as a candidate?
Hell yeah! Get out of here.
So it's all candidates.
Get out of here. Yeah, I want Elizabeth Warren gone. I want her going out there and hanging out with Putin or doing whatever it is good establishment folk do when they're blaming others. Yep, want her out of here.
Niko, don't you think most of Elizabeth Warren's votes, a lot of them are going to go over to Bernie Sanders?
They already did. We saw that in New Hampshire. Now, I will say, though, I'm kind of like a Democratic absolutist. I don't believe in calling for people to drop out. But I am saying if you're a Bernie supporter and you are concerned with someone dropping out because they're actually stealing your votes, then you should be directing your attention more to Elizabeth Warren, to be quite honest with you. And that should have been from the beginning. But we just saw way too much attention being focused on Tulsi and people are saying, oh, Elizabeth Warren is the second most progressive person in the race. It's not like she'll stab us in the back for a third time. Why would she ever do that?
Yeah.
Here we are.
I'm a guy who believes in institutions, and I couldn't stand it in 2016 when everybody was saying Sanders has no path to victory. He needs to drop out now. I thought it was ludicrous, and I think it's ludicrous now. Johnny Sue, anything else? Guys, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Niko House, Steve Grumbine, with us to talk about what's going on with Tulsi, what she should do. Should she drop out, stay in the race? Thank you very much, gentlemen. Remember, join us on the Caucus Day coming up next Saturday. I want to say a special thanks to Steve Woolbrand for the Super Chat contribution. It is always appreciated on the couch. And for Jaybird said, Tulsi bashing is why I pulled membership from the Tim Black Show. Thank you, Niko and the Convo Couch, for your hard work. Thank you. And Audit Press, Niko, Pasta, please reach out to Auditing America. We'll take a look at it. For Pasta Jardula, Steve Grumbine, Niko House, and Johnny Sue on those ones and twos. Convo out. Join us for the caucuses.